4 lifeboats intact. Cargo secured, engine warm, deck swept, charts spread on the captain's table. 32 empty berths below, not a soul in sight. The Atlas, a British steamer, 1,850 tons, 32 souls. Everyone vanished. Liverpool to Buenos Aires, calm seas, clear skies. Found drifting 240 miles off Uruguay. The Board of Trade classified it. Unexplained disappearance. Accidents leave wreckage. Storms leave damage. Mutiny leaves bodies. But what leaves a ship sailing itself with warm boiler and no crew at the wheel? The Atlas cleared Liverpool on the 15th of March, 1891, a Tuesday morning, low tide. The vessel carried 340 bales of wool and 89 rolls of leather bound for Argentine markets. Standard cargo for the South Atlantic run. The ship's master was Captain Thomas Harwell, 47 years old, 23 years at sea. His first mate, William Ashford, had sailed the Liverpool-Buenos Aires route 11 times. The crew manifest listed 32 men, 24 English, 5 Irish, 2 Norwegian, 1 Portuguese, experienced hands, no reported tensions. The Atlas was built in Glasgow in 1886. Iron hull, twin expansion steam engine, 2 masts rigging auxiliary sails for fuel economy. Certified for transatlantic service by Lloyd's Register. The ship had completed 14 voyages without incident. The vessel was insured for £12,000 sterling. Weather records from the Meteorological Office confirm conditions along the route during late March and early April. Moderate southeast winds. No storms reported between the 35th and 40th parallels. Sea state calm to moderate. The Atlas should have reached Montevideo by the 5th of April, then Buenos Aires by the 8th. Standard crossing time, 21 to 23 days. On the 8th of April, at 1440 hours, the Royal Navy cruiser HMS Resolute was conducting routine patrol 240 nautical miles east of Punta del Este, Uruguay. Lookout reported a steamer on the horizon. Course erratic. Speed reduced but not stopped. The Resolute's captain, Commander George Lennox, ordered approach. Through the telescope, the Atlas was visible, funnel emitting thin smoke, auxiliary sails still set, hull riding normally in the water. No distress signals, no crew visible on deck. The Resolute signaled with flags, no response. Commander Lennox ordered a shot across the bow. The Atlas continued its slow drift. At 1510 hours, the Resolute launched a boarding boat. 8 men, Lieutenant Peter Hardwick in command. The boat reached the Atlas' starboard side. Hardwick called out. Silence. The boarding party climbed the rope ladder hanging from the rail. Boots on deck, empty deck. Hardwick's report, filed that evening and preserved in Admiralty records, describes what the boarding party found in systematic detail. The wheel was lashed in position, set to maintain a southeast heading. Ropes coiled properly. Deck scrubbed. No blood, no scorch marks, no signs of struggle. The ship's bell hung in place. The compass in the binnacle showed accurate bearing. Charts on the navigation table were spread open to the correct position. Latitude 35 degrees south, longitude 52 degrees west. Pencil marks indicated the ship's calculated position as of 9:15 that morning, less than 6 hours before the Resolute's approach. The boarding party descended into the main cabin. Captain Harwell's quarters were orderly. Bed made, uniform jacket hanging on a peg. The logbook lay open on the desk. The last entry, written in clear handwriting, recorded 8th April, 09:15 hours, position 35 degrees 12 minutes south, 52 degrees 8 minutes west. Weather fair, wind southeast, moderate, sea calm, all well. The ink was still damp when Lieutenant Hardwick touched the page. In the galley, the stove was cold, but not long cold. Tin cups sat on the table, bread in the cupboard, salt pork in the barrel. The crew quarters below deck showed bunks with blankets folded or rumpled. Personal items remained: tobacco pouches, carved pipes, letters, photographs pinned to wooden walls, sea bags hung from hooks, work boots lined up beneath berths, 32 sleeping spaces, 32 absences. The engine room was the strangest discovery. The boiler held heat, not the fierce heat of full operation, not the cold of a dead furnace. Warmth. The kind of warmth that suggests a fire recently banked, not extinguished. Coal remained in the bunker. The pressure gauge read low but not zero. The engine had been running within the past few hours, then allowed to slow. Someone had managed the throttle down deliberately. But the stokers were gone. Tools hung in their places. The grease-stained logbook near the boiler showed the last entry at 8:45 that morning. Pressure nominal, coal consumption standard. Handwriting steady. No sign of alarm. Lieutenant Hardwick ordered a complete search. The hold was inspected. 340 bales of wool, undisturbed. 89 rolls of leather, still lashed in place. The cargo was worth approximately £4,000. It had not been touched. The 4 lifeboats remained in their davits. Ropes unused, canvas covers fastened. If the crew had abandoned ship, they had done so without taking the means to survive at sea. The boats were as the Atlas had left Liverpool, ready for emergency, never deployed. By 1700 hours, the boarding party had completed its initial inspection. Commander Lennox made the decision to tow the Atlas to Montevideo. The Resolute attached tow cables. The 2 ships began the slow journey west. On the deck of the Atlas, Lieutenant Hardwick stood near the wheel. The sun was setting. The sea was calm. Hardwick wrote in his personal diary that night, "The ship feels occupied, as if the crew has merely stepped into a room we cannot see." The Atlas reached Montevideo on the 12th of April. Port authorities documented the arrival. Customs inspectors verified the cargo. The British consul in Uruguay sent a telegram to the Board of Trade in London. The message was brief. Steamer Atlas arrived under tow, crew missing, no explanation. The vessel was secured at a commercial wharf. Stevedores refused to board. Word had spread among the dock workers. The ship that sailed itself. A ship with no men. Within 3 days, local newspapers carried the story. Speculation began. Piracy, disease, mutiny, mass suicide, supernatural intervention. None of the theories matched the evidence. The Board of Trade opened formal inquiry number BOT/1891/327A. Investigators traveled to Montevideo. They examined the Atlas in detail. They interviewed the HMS Resolute crew. They reviewed the logbook, the charts, the cargo manifest. They sent divers to inspect the hull below the waterline. They measured the coal reserves and calculated fuel consumption. They tested the boiler for leaks or malfunctions. They found a ship in working order. They found no crew. The inquiry report, filed in July of 1891, concluded with a single-word classification: unexplained. The Atlas was sold at auction in August. A shipping company from Montevideo purchased the vessel for £6,000, half its insured value. The new owners renamed it the Santa Lucia. It operated in coastal South American trade until 1903, when it was broken up for scrap in Buenos Aires. But the question remained, filed in the archives of the Board of Trade, in the logs of the HMS Resolute, in the newspapers of Montevideo and Liverpool and London. 32 men, experienced sailors, calm seas. A working ship, all gone in less than 6 hours, without taking the lifeboats, without leaving a message, without a single body ever found. The Board of Trade appointed Inspector Edmund Carruthers to lead the formal investigation. Carruthers had examined 17 maritime incidents in the previous decade. He arrived in Montevideo on the 20th of April with 2 assistants. Arthur Wilmot, a marine surveyor, and Dr. Robert Finch, a physician with shipboard medical experience. Carruthers began with the physical evidence. On the 22nd of April, the inspection team boarded the Atlas at the Montevideo wharf. Wilmot examined the hull plates for stress fractures. Finch inspected the crew quarters for signs of illness. Carruthers photographed everything. In the captain's cabin, Carruthers found Captain Harwell's personal correspondence, letters to his wife in Liverpool. The most recent, dated the 6th of April, described the voyage as uneventful. Harwell wrote that the crew was in good health, arrival in Buenos Aires expected by the 10th. The letter was sealed but never posted. Harwell had intended to mail it upon arrival. He never got the chance. The logbook entries were reviewed line by line. From March 15th to April 8th, the entries followed standard format. On March 23rd, Harwell recorded a minor incident. A deckhand named Samuel Price had been reprimanded for drunkenness. On April 2nd, the chief engineer, Henry Drummond, reported a loose valve in the port cylinder. Repairs completed within 4 hours. No other irregularities appeared in the official record, but Carruthers noticed something. The handwriting in the logbook changed slightly in the final days. The final words, "all well," were written with less confidence, the letters smaller, the spacing uneven. Wilmot's structural survey found no damage to the hull. The boiler operated without issue. The coal bunker held enough fuel for another 8 days of steaming. There was no reason, from an engineering perspective, to leave the ship. Dr. Finch examined the crew quarters for evidence of disease: cholera, typhus, yellow fever. He found no vomit, no blood, no soiled bedding. The ship's medical chest was inventoried, bandages unused, morphine ampules intact. Finch's report stated, "No indication of epidemic illness, no sign of mass poisoning." The galley provided another puzzle. Coffee grounds. Fresh coffee grounds in the waste bin, not molded, not dried out. Someone had brewed coffee the morning of April 8th. The crew had been drinking coffee hours before they vanished. Carruthers interviewed the HMS Resolute crew. Lieutenant Hardwick repeated his account, but one detail stood out. When the boarding party first climbed onto the Atlas deck, Hardwick had noticed the ship's bell. It was tied with a piece of canvas, preventing it from ringing. The weather on April 8th had been calm. There was no reason to silence the bell. Carruthers requested the crew contracts from Liverpool. All 32 men had signed standard agreements, no unusual clauses. He also obtained the service records for Captain Harwell and First Mate Ashford. Harwell's record showed 23 years without serious incident. Ashford's record was similarly clean, 11 crossings of the South Atlantic. The most disturbing discovery came during the inspection of the cargo hold. Wilmot noticed scratch marks on the inside of the forward hatch cover. Deep scratches, recent scratches. They ran in parallel lines, 4 lines, the width of a human hand. Carruthers had the marks analyzed by a metallurgist in Montevideo. The metallurgist confirmed the scratches were fresh, made within days, not weeks. The pressure required to create such marks would have been significant. Desperation or fear. But the hatch had been found closed and latched from the outside. Carruthers ordered the hold searched again. Every bale of wool was moved. Every roll of leather inspected. No bodies, no blood, no hidden compartments. But the scratches remained. On May 9th, Carruthers submitted his preliminary findings to the Board of Trade. The ship was seaworthy, the crew experienced, the weather favorable. No signs of violence, illness, or mechanical failure. But Carruthers included a note at the end. The evidence suggests deliberate abandonment under circumstances that remain unclear. Carruthers returned to Liverpool in June. He interviewed the families of the missing crew. The wife of First Mate Ashford mentioned something. Ashford had sent a letter from Lisbon, where the Atlas had stopped briefly for coal on March 22nd. In the letter, Ashford wrote that the crew was uneasy. The letter ended with a line that Ashford's wife remembered clearly. "The men say the ship feels wrong." The inquiry report was finalized in July. Carruthers concluded that the Atlas crew had abandoned ship voluntarily between 9:15 and 1400 hours on April 8th. The cause of abandonment could not be determined. The case was classified as unexplained, but one document remained in the file that Carruthers had not included in his official report. A statement from a dock worker in Montevideo. When he entered the hold, he smelled something. Not decay, not salt water, something chemical, sharp, like ammonia or sulfur, but faint. The smell faded quickly. By the time other workers entered, it was gone. Carruthers had noted the statement. He had filed it, but he had not pursued it, and smells do not make men vanish. The Atlas file was closed. Maritime records contain similar cases. Ships found intact, crews gone. But the Atlas case contained details that set it apart. The warm boiler, the damp ink, the tied bell, the scratches in the hold. These were not the markers of a ship abandoned in haste. They suggested planning, concealment, control. In 1912, a retired mariner named Geoffrey Maitland published a memoir. In one chapter, he mentioned the Atlas. Maitland claimed he had spoken with a sailor who had nearly signed onto the Atlas crew, but withdrew at the last moment. According to Maitland, the sailor said, "That ship carried something it should not have carried." Maitland did not elaborate. The memoir moved on to other topics. Maitland died in 1914, but the memoir was published. It exists in maritime archives, and it raises a question. What cargo, beyond wool and leather, might the Atlas have been carrying? Shipping manifests in the 1890s were not always complete. Captains sometimes accepted unofficial cargo for extra payment, things that shippers preferred not to declare to customs. If Captain Harwell had agreed to transport something undeclared, it would not appear in any official document. There is a second, unexplained detail: the position. When the HMS Resolute found the Atlas, the ship was 240 miles east of the Uruguayan coast, but those coordinates put the ship 170 miles further east than the planned route. Currents in the South Atlantic flow west and north. If the Atlas had been drifting unmanned since 9:15 on the morning of April 8th, it should have moved west, toward the coast, but the ship was found further east, against the current. That suggests the engine had been running after 9:15. Someone had kept the ship moving east, away from land, away from witnesses. There is also the matter of the lifeboats, 4 boats, all in place. If the crew had abandoned ship, they would have used the boats, unless they had been picked up by another vessel. But no other vessel reported contact with the Atlas. So how did 32 men leave a ship in the middle of the ocean without using lifeboats and without being rescued? One theory focused on carbon monoxide. If the Atlas boiler had been leaking gas, the crew might have been incapacitated. But carbon monoxide poisoning leaves bodies. The Atlas had no bodies. A second theory circulated among sailors in South American ports. The Atlas crew had encountered something at sea. Not a ship, not a storm, something else. Sailors spoke in euphemisms. Bad water, wrong winds, things that follow. The theory was dismissed by officials as superstition. In 1937, 46 years after the Atlas disappeared, a fishing trawler hauled up debris in its nets. The debris included fragments of wood and metal, also a brass plate bearing the name Atlas. The fragments were examined by maritime historians in Montevideo. One detail did not fit. The wood fragments showed scorch marks, deep scorch marks, consistent with intense heat. The Atlas had not been reported as damaged by fire, yet the fragments pulled from the sea showed fire damage. The scorch marks were localized, concentrated, as if something specific had been burned, deliberately. The fragments were stored in a museum in Montevideo. In 1973, during a reorganization, A researcher noted an additional detail. One of the wood fragments had an inscription carved into it, faint, almost erased by time. The inscription read, "Forgive us." 2 words, carved by hand. Who carved those words? When? Why? The wood could have come from any part of the ship, but the words exist. Someone aboard the Atlas felt the need to ask forgiveness. For what? Carruthers had died in 1924. His personal papers were donated to a maritime museum. Among the papers was a folder labeled Atlas Supplementary Notes. One document was a letter from the Port Authority in Lisbon. The letter confirmed that the Atlas had stopped in Lisbon on March 22nd. The port inspection report noted that the crew appeared nervous and unwilling to speak. Captain Harwell had requested permission to inspect the cargo hold privately. The request was unusual. The inspector allowed it. Harwell spent 2 hours in the hold, alone. When he emerged, he said nothing. What was Harwell looking for? Or what was he trying to hide? The Atlas left Liverpool on March 15th. It stopped in Lisbon on March 22nd. Ashford wrote his letter on the same day, mentioning that the ship felt wrong. Then the Atlas continued south. 18 days later, the crew was gone. There is one final piece of evidence, a logbook entry that was not written by Captain Harwell. The entry was found on a loose page tucked into the back of the ship's logbook. The handwriting did not match Harwell's. The entry was dated April 7th, one day before the crew vanished. The entry read, "We have made a mistake. We should not have agreed to this. God help us." The entry was unsigned. Carruthers had the handwriting analysed. The analyst concluded that the writing was done by someone under stress, but the analyst could not identify the writer. The page was filed in the supplementary notes. It was not included in the official report. The Atlas sailed into history. The crew did not. 32 men, Thomas Harwell, William Ashford, Henry Drummond, Samuel Price, 28 others whose names appear only in crew manifests. They vanished on a calm sea under a clear sky. The ship they left behind floated on, empty, waiting, the logbook open, the ink still wet. The facts are these. The Atlas departed Liverpool on the 15th of March, 1891. The ship stopped in Lisbon on March 22nd. The crew became uneasy. Captain Harwell inspected the cargo hold privately for 2 hours. The ship continued south. On April 8th, between 9:15 in the morning and 1400 hours in the afternoon, the entire crew disappeared. The ship was found drifting 240 miles off Uruguay. The boiler was warm. The lifeboats were unused. No bodies were ever recovered. The most consistent explanation involves undeclared cargo. In the 1890s, merchant shipping operated with minimal oversight. Captains supplemented income by accepting private cargo not listed on official manifests. Items that shippers wanted to move quietly. Sometimes valuable, sometimes dangerous. The Atlas manifest listed wool and leather, but evidence suggests the ship carried something else. Consider the sequence. The crew was reported as normal when the Atlas left Liverpool, but in Lisbon, 7 days later, the crew was nervous. First Mate Ashford wrote that the ship felt wrong. Captain Harwell spent 2 hours alone in the cargo hold. What was he inspecting? Standard cargo does not require private inspection. Wool and leather do not make ships feel wrong, but chemical cargo does. Volatile cargo does. The 1890s saw increasing industrial use of chemicals. Ammonia for refrigeration, sulfuric acid for manufacturing, phosphorus for matches, naphthalene for dyes. These substances were transported by sea, often improperly packaged, sometimes hidden among legal cargo to avoid port fees or safety inspections. A leak from such cargo would produce exactly what the dock worker in Montevideo described: a sharp chemical smell, faint, temporary, gone before it could be verified. If the Atlas was carrying hidden chemical cargo, and if that cargo began leaking or reacting during the voyage, The crew would have faced a choice: continue to port and risk explosion or contamination, or abandon ship. The evidence suggests they chose abandonment. But why steer the ship away from land first? The Atlas was found further east than its planned route, against the current. That indicates someone kept the engine running after the last logbook entry. Someone deliberately moved the ship away from the coast, away from populated areas, away from other shipping lanes. This is not the behavior of a crew fleeing in panic. This is the behavior of a crew trying to minimize harm. If the cargo was dangerous, bringing the ship to port would endanger dock workers, customs inspectors, entire cities. The crew may have decided to steer the ship into open water, let it drift, and hope it would sink before reaching land. The warm boiler supports this theory. Someone managed the engine carefully, kept it running long enough to move the ship east, then reduced power gradually. A controlled shutdown, not a panicked flight. But how did the crew leave? The lifeboats were in place. No other vessel reported a rescue. This remains the hardest question. One possibility: the crew did use the lifeboats, but replaced them afterward to conceal evidence of abandonment. This would require time and coordination. But if the crew believed they were preventing a catastrophe, they might have taken that time. Another possibility: a vessel did pick them up, but that vessel was engaged in smuggling or illegal activity and did not report the rescue. A third possibility: the crew never left at all. They died aboard the Atlas from chemical exposure, and their bodies were disposed of at sea before the HMS Resolute arrived. The scratches in the hold suggest desperation. Someone was trapped, or someone was trying to escape. The carving "Forgive us" suggests guilt. The crew knew something. They had agreed to something, and they regretted it. The anonymous note found in the logbook confirms this. We should not have agreed to this. Agreed to what? Transporting dangerous cargo, accepting payment to carry something illegal, keeping silent about what was in the hold. The fire damage found on the Atlas fragments in 1937 adds a final layer. The scorch marks were not consistent with scrapping. They were concentrated, localized, as if something specific had been burned. Perhaps the section of the hold where the chemical cargo was stored. Perhaps evidence that needed to be destroyed. No one was held accountable for the disappearance of the Atlas crew. The Board of Trade inquiry concluded with unexplained. Captain Harwell was listed as lost at sea. The crew families received no compensation. Shipping companies in Liverpool continued to operate without additional safety inspections. The practice of transporting undeclared cargo did not change. The Atlas case became a maritime legend. A ghost ship. A mystery, but not a warning. The ship itself was sold cheaply, renamed, put back into service. The Santa Lucia carried cargo along the South American coast for 12 years. In 1903, the ship was broken apart in Buenos Aires. The hull, the engine, the cabins where 32 men had slept, all reduced to scrap metal and ash. The families waited for news, waited for bodies, waited for explanation. None came. Thomas Harwell's wife in Liverpool received a letter from the Board of Trade in August of 1891. The letter expressed regret. It stated that her husband was presumed dead. It offered no details, no closure, just a single word: unexplained. The same word sent to 31 other families. 32 men reduced to 32 identical letters. Maritime law in the 1890s did not require cargo manifests to be complete or accurate. Captains had discretion. Shipping companies had profits to protect. Port authorities had limited resources for inspection. The system relied on honesty. And honesty, when weighed against money, often failed. The Atlas was not the first ship to carry undeclared cargo. It was not the last. But it was one of the few where the cargo, whatever it was, took everyone aboard. The case remains in the archives. The photographs yellow, the reports brittle. The logbook with its damp final entry preserved under glass in a maritime museum. Visitors look at it sometimes. They read the words "All Well" written in ink that was still wet when Lieutenant Hardwick touched the page. They ask the same questions. What happened to the crew? Where did they go? Why did they leave? But perhaps the better question is different. The Atlas sailed under a flag of commerce, but it carried the weight of a system that valued profit over transparency, speed over safety, silence over truth. 32 men paid the price. The ship that carried them became a legend. The system that failed them remained unchanged. If everyone involved knew the risks, why was no one held responsible in any official record?